Welcome to the Age of Awakening.
Please identify yourself. Enter.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. In particular, welcome back, Triple P Nation. It's your host, Dr. J. So grateful that you guys have chose to join me once again this week. We're going to take a little break from all the health conversations that we've been having over the last 5 or 6 weeks. And we're going to get back into some business building. But in particular, we're going to really be talking about relationship building and solving conflict, whether it's at work, in your business, or, with that significant someone or a friend or whoever it might be. It's all about being a great communicator and building great relationships. As a fan of the show, and if you're listening to this, you must be. And as always, I absolutely adore and appreciate every one of you who check out our shows each and every week. And if you're a new listener, welcome. We're excited to have you. Where you been? We've been here 6.5 years. Maybe just somebody referred to you or shared an episode, but welcome. This is the Triple P Life Podcast. And this show's mission is about empowering dreams, igniting passion, and accelerating your prosperity in every area of your life, mentally, physically, spiritually, financially, relationships. And so this week is about building your business, building your finances. More importantly, it's about building great relationships, which is the benefactor of all these things, because the more effective you are at creating and building great relationships, which starts with listening plus the skill sets to do conflict resolution, the better your life's going to be. It's really that simple. So I get an incredible guest for you here. I'll introduce him here in just a moment. But, I haven't done in quite some time. I haven't asked you to do a follow, rate, and review on your favorite podcast app. So whether it's Apple Music or if it's Google, if it's Spotify, SoundCloud, whatever it might be. YouTube, of course, go there and hit the follow button, hit the like button, leave us a review. Those reviews are absolutely golden for us. And if you like the content, then that's the least you can do and show us a little bit of love back here for the content, the great content that we're creating for you each and every week. And then also hit the little bell. This way you'll never miss when the next episode of the Triple P Life Podcast drops, which is typically every Monday, but sometimes there's a little disruption in the schedule. But I really try to make sure that we are consistent each and every week. And pretty much we've done so for nearly 7 years. That's how long this podcast has been rocking and rolling. So as I mentioned, I got a really, really fun guest here this week. His name is Michael Reddington. And Michael is a certified forensic interview and CFI, not CSI, CFI. I know you're going, what the hell is a CFI? Well, he is really quite remarkable. He spent a decade traveling the world conducting investigations and teaching interview and interrogation techniques. No, you won't be interrogated on the show, but he started his career, as he mentions, going in the box and working with people who have been accused of crimes that perhaps the detectives weren't very good at getting the individual to confess. Well, Michael, he knows how to do it. He's, worked and taught interrogation techniques to federal agents, law enforcement, and even private sector investigations. And, he transitioned his career to focus on teaching leaders, negotiators, sales professionals, HR people, how to apply the strategic observation and persuasion communication skills necessary to help you unlock hidden value in all your high-value conversations. He's also the author of Disciplined Listening Method. It was an incredible, fun conversation. Michael's really smart. You're going to learn a lot about this topic. And so if you have a relationship in your life, and unless you're dead, you have, dozens relationships, some really important to you. Do you want to learn how to better connect in your relationships, whether it's at home, at work, the gym, wherever it may be? Michael's the guy you want to learn from. So sit back, relax, enjoy my interview with Michael Reddington. I'm excited this week, guys, to introduce to you Michael Reddington, who is a certified forensic interviewer, executive resource, the author of the Disciplined Listening Method, which got my attention up because, one of the conversations we talk about is about building relationships. I've often said that one of the keys to success in life and business is being great at building great relationships. And that requires to be an incredible listener. So being able to communicate in a manner in which, you can find common ground and footing with any individual, whether it's an employee, an employer, business partner, whatever it might be. So when I saw this come through, it's like, I got to get Michael on. So Michael, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, Jay. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's just start a little bit from the beginning. Give me some background. How did you get into this? Because honestly, I've never heard of a certified forensic interviewer. So this is new to me.
Well, I appreciate you asking, and it's new to a lot of folks that don't have a career in investigation, so it's understandable. I'll give you the short version. I don't want to take up our whole conversation, but essentially I started out as a special education teacher and baseball coach at the middle school level. Thought that's all I would ever do. From there, I bounced around to some different jobs. I lasted in a job in the financial industry for 2 years, 1 month, and 2 days before I figured out that was the absolute wrong place for me. Went back to get a business degree, was working at night in order to pay for school. And one of my jobs just happened to be in the security field. And one promotion led to another. And the next thing you know, I was being asked to have conversations with people who made regrettable decisions. And my job was to encourage them to tell the truth about it and write it down for me. So thankfully, I was able to be successful at it pretty much right out of the gate. I had wonderful mentors that set me up for success, but then they turned me on to some great training courses. So after going through some fantastic training courses, at that point, I was up in New England. So I was in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey. So based on where I was, there was no shortage of people to have conversations with, because I think I might have accidentally insulted everywhere I just lived and grew up, which I didn't mean to do. But there were plenty of conversations for me to have. And again, I had great mentors, great teachers. So that culminated with me earning my certified forensic interviewer designation. And that designation really is a designation of expertise in a field, just like your certified project manager or your certified public accountant. It's, a designation of expertise. And really the way that I like to say it is if somebody earns their CFI, they should be able to be blindfolded, rolled out of the back of a truck, and wherever they wake up, they should be able to conduct a morally, legally, and successful interview, really in any context. And a lot of that comes from what you said in your opening, the ability to find common ground. Often when we're asked about what made my former teammates and I so successful in the work that we did, especially because we were often asked to come in and interview people who had already been interviewed and not confessed in cases where there wasn't any evidence. That's where most often we were brought in. And honestly, we were quite successful in that arena. I believe techniques and things aside, obviously those were part of it, but our ability to embrace the universality of the human experience. No matter who we're talking to, no matter what situation we're in, we always have something in common with the other person. Always. We just have the opportunity to choose, are we going to accept that and build from it? Or are we going to focus on our judgment, our expectations, our differences, and allow that to split us apart? So as my career in interview and interrogation continued to grow, I was recruited by a company, Wicklander Zalowski. We were just talking earlier in suburban Chicago. I was there for 10 years, running their investigations division, traveling the world, teaching non-confrontational interrogation techniques and conducting them on a contract basis. And at that point in time, I started working with more and more executives, business owners, CEOs, sales leaders, negotiators, and in working with them, pretty quickly identified that they were solving the same exact communication problems that I was in the interview room. They were just called different things because they were in different conversations. When in reality, it's two people problem solving. It's the same thing. That caused me to unleash my geek one more time and led me outside of the interview and interrogation box, if you will, into all kinds of research around persuasion and trust and relationship building and leadership and sales and negotiation, which eventually led me to putting what I found to be the best practices together to create that disciplined listening method that you're talking about, in order to give people a core set of behaviors and understanding of how to uncover hidden value in every conversation. Really, again, to get back to the point that you used to start, by prioritizing what our counterparts need to experience, not what we would prefer to say and do.
Sure, that makes a ton of sense. And there's so much to unpack there. First, I'm fascinated. If anyone listening today, and I'm sure there are quite a few, fans of, shows like CSI and stuff like that, you're the guy who goes in after the guy who already went in and couldn't get the assailant to confess to the crime per se. So I'm interested, And I don't know if there's certain techniques that you can't divulge or whatever, but can you kind of walk us through what you would do that would be different when you step into the box, as you said, right, to help find or at least maybe to move that individual to bring forth the truth?
Sure. So and this, I can tell you everything. I mean,
All right, cool. Let's
it'd be
go.
cool if I had these really super secret techniques that nobody can know, right? Well, we'll tell everyone, but don't have to kill everyone. No, I'm
Right.
happy to share everything that I got.
Super.
Realistically, in nearly any situation, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush and impinge my credibility right out of the gate. But the vast majority of the time, if you want someone to change their mind, to tell you the truth, or to confess to a crime, really what you're asking somebody to do is share sensitive information under vulnerable circumstances in the face of consequences. That's true when you're talking to your kids. It's true when you're talking to your employees. It's true when you're negotiating deals. It's true when you're interviewing a candidate. It's true when you're interviewing a suspect, victim witness, or suspect in a crime. So with that, if we want somebody to commit, not comply, but commit to sharing sensitive information under vulnerable circumstances in the face of consequences, more often than not, three things have to be in place. They have to believe that, in this case, because you asked about my teammates and I, they have to believe that we're credible. And we've got to be able to establish that credibility without bragging, because that turns everybody off. Then they have to believe the truth either is already known or will imminently be known. And we got to do that without bluffing, without making false threats, without making false promises. And then they have to have the ability to save face. And if we work backwards, giving somebody the ability to save face is where most people crash and burn. Because in how we were operationally conditioned to communicate, we end up casting judgment. And the number one fear that will stop most adults from telling the truth, from sharing sensitive information, from taking accountability, to accepting outside ideas is the fear of embarrassment. That's the biggest one. And all too often, the way we communicate with people, we feel like we might be trying to build rapport. We feel like we might be trying to understand, but really what we're doing is conveying judgment. So, number one, if you want somebody to tell you the truth in any sensitive situation, we've got to go out of our way to help them save face. If we keep working backwards, how do we help them feel like the truth is already known? There's many different ways to do this. Now, I want to say again, we don't bluff. We don't fake anything, because as soon as that bluff is called, you're dead. There's no coming back from that. We don't make threats. We don't make promises. But what we can do, and even to apply this to business conversations, because I know that's a large segment of your audience, is instead of us telling somebody, I know how you're feeling, I know what you're experiencing, I know what it's like in your job, I know what it's like in your business, I know what you need. Even if I do, that comes across as assumptive, judgmental, arrogant. That can sever a relationship before it ever starts. But if I change it, if I just drop the word you and I make an illustrative statement, often when we find organizations who are really working hard to determine the next best investment opportunity, often when we sit down to talk with managers who are caught in the middle between doing what the senior executives have asked and serving the employees on the front lines who know what the reality of the situation is, that trap they find themselves in often leads them to think or do. So now, by me making an illustrative statement about the situation the person is in, it demonstrates that I know the truth without me having to pin it on them. And it also makes it sound like it's not my first rodeo and they're not the only one that's ever been in this situation before. Therefore, reducing feelings of judgment and embarrassment and increasing the perception of our credibility, which we were talking about a little bit earlier.
Can you give me an example of an illustrative statement?
Yeah, those were two short ones right there. Can you give me like an example or a context maybe that your audience would appreciate?
Sure. Let's say whether it's a small business owner or a HR manager is meeting with a review of an employee and they're trying to get them to move in a different direction. The performance is not up to snuff kind of thing.
Sure.
And you're hoping to empower them to move in a different direction so you can get the best out of that individual. So give me an example in that context.
Love the example. And I'll do one, at least one, if not a couple for you. Before I do, I certainly want to say this, especially when it comes to the performance management. I'm a big believer that at some point we have to have the no BS conversation with somebody, right? Either you improve or we make a change here. Where I tend to deviate, and not just me, just from my own personal opinion, where I tend to deviate from some is we don't go there too fast. If you've got somebody who is new and has potential, if you've got someone that's got a history of success and now they're in a rut, if it's an important job, like if there are potential value in the job, the relationship, the outcome, then I don't want to just threaten them right out of the gate, because that probably is going to do more harm than good. I didn't coin the term. Lots of people have heard it. I certainly buy into the coach up or coach out mentality. So the example that I'm going to give now is when we're in that coach up stage. But if we've tried this 1, 2, 3 times and it's still not working as part of a larger performance development plan, then eventually you got to sit down and say, Jay, we've been talking about this for 3 months. Let's just be clear. But we're not there yet for this example. So let's say that I'll do 2 if it's all right. I'll do
Sure.
1 for a newer employee who we think has potential, and I'll do 1 for a seasoned employee whose performance seems to have dropped. And the principle that we use is illustrate before you investigate. I want to illustrate my understanding of the situation before I investigate the problem and start moving for accountability. So it could go something like this, just to do a generic example. It could be, Jay, I really appreciate you taking a few minutes to sit down and have a conversation with me today. For me in a management role, one of the most important conversations I can have is with somebody who's relatively new to the team, who we brought on board for their skill set, for their culture fit, for all the potential that they have. And we just feel like we haven't seen them kick it into the gear that we expected as fast as they thought they would. But for us, we've got to step back and think, well, wait a minute. How come that hasn't happened? Is it because there were misaligned expectations? Are there some sort of barriers out there that we don't know? Are they just being pulled in too many different directions by too many different managers? Or is the learning curve just a little bit steeper than we anticipated it? So I'm curious, Jay, as we take a look at where we are and where we both want to be based on the conversations we've had before, what would you say are the top 3 barriers to breaking through to that next level? So now what I've done is I've demonstrated credibility by making it sound like this isn't the first time I've had this conversation with somebody, and you're not the first person who's ever sat in this chair, because both things are true. And then I helped you save face, not by saying, and I do this a little bit for effect, Jay, what's your problem? On paper, you were great. In your interview, you were great, but you haven't been great since you got here. What's stopping you from being great, dude? What is it? Even if I'm trying to build rapport, the more I use the word you, that word is maybe the most dangerous word in the English language. It's just a shot at somebody's self-image. So instead, what I do is say, important conversations I can have, or people like this in this situation, high potential new people in this situation. Now social proof is kicking in because you're like, hey, I'm a high potential person in a new situation. That's me. So now you're not under the stereotypical spotlight on TV. You can protect your self-image and start to listen. And now this can be a little bit counterintuitive to folks, but we can't solve a problem if it's not on the table. So what I want to do is I want to get the truth in stages. I don't want to go for the Law and Order version of the truth right now. I did it. I knew it was wrong. I'm sorry. I failed. It'll never happen again. That's 5 different confessions. If I can give them a list of reasons/excuses that their performance is falling, and they use one of those reasons/excuses to say, this is why my performance isn't up to standard, they just confess to their performance not being up to standard. Now the problem is on the table, and now we can work together to fix it and lead to accountability instead of leading with accountability. So those lists of 3 to 5 reasons that I give them, they're all legit. I mean, they could really happen. So now instead of them having to say, Mike, I'm sorry, you're right. I'm failing. I'm not where I want to be. Now they can say, hey, I'm working as hard as I can. Yeah, I didn't think the learning curve would be so steep. And I got 3 different managers asking me to do 3 different things. I promise I'm working as hard as I can. Cool. They just told me they're not where they want to be. All right. Now I can unpack the reasons that they gave me. Maybe the learning curve is a little steeper, and maybe they're getting mixed messages from their managers, or maybe they're not. But now I can use the excuses they gave me. I can ask them to tell me more about those excuses, parse the reality versus the deflection, and then work with them to create an action plan moving forward, as opposed to just sitting down and saying, Jay, what's the problem, dude? I expect so much more out of you. You need to get it in gear.
I've often been taught that in a leadership position, in these kinds of scenarios, that one of the effective tools is that you want that particular individual to come up with solutions to solve the known or agreed upon issue.
Sure.
If whoever it is, the HR or the boss or whatever the case may be, is providing the solution, they own the problem. Would you agree with that?
I do. Now, every once in a while, we find ourselves in a situation where we have to sit down with somebody and say, this is what we're going to do. But if we pull those aside, yeah, I absolutely agree with you. If we can have a conversation where now the person we're speaking with has input, has some ownership, even if they don't present what becomes the final idea, they present components of what becomes the final idea, then yes, that should line up more with their self-image. They should be more likely to commit it. They should be more likely to execute it over a period of time and feel like it was there. So yeah, I definitely agree.
How much consideration, if any, do you take into account the personality types? I'm sure you're familiar with this in the corporate world, whether it's DISC profile or
Yeah.
Myers-Briggs, or, there's so many of them out there. How do you take that into consideration with who's sitting in front of you, knowing that these, depending on what category you fall under, they react differently to different situations. So you may approach it differently based on how their personality type is.
I think that's a great point. Anytime we are sitting down to have a high impact conversation with somebody, some combination of the outcome and or relationship is valuable to us. Now, based on that, how we execute this conversation, the bond we form during the conversation, and the actions we both take after the conversation are important. So based on that, yeah, reasonably speaking, I want to gather as much intelligence as I can about the person that I'm going to speak with, and I want to cater as much of what I do to them. It can come down to what time of day do we have the conversation? What's the location of the conversation? Quite honestly, am I the one that leads it, or does one of my teammates get tapped in for this one because the outcome is more important than who leads the conversation? People might think I'm crazy. But it might come down to the color shirt that I wear. Do I wear my glasses or not? Like, all of these things come into play. And then, of course, once the conversation starts, yes, any intel I have about how they like to make decisions, how they prefer to be communicated with. Do I know if they have any triggers, things that are likely to set them off? Do I know if they have anything that they're likely to fall in line with quicker? Sometimes, do I know that this is the type of person that has to speak, has to get their voice heard? Maybe they've got a prepared story, a prepared excuse. They've been talking to somebody else about the situation prior. Well, in those scenarios, I'm going to let them go first because they're not going to listen to me until they're done talking anyway. So I may as well let them talk until I hear, because now I know they're willing to listen to me next. So yes, whatever intel we can gather, when there's any combination of the relationship and outcome that's valuable to us, we should be using that intel to develop our communication strategy and not just going in thinking, well, I'm Mike Reddington and this is how I do it, so this is how I'm going to do it. Because that might accidentally be successful a small percentage of times, but more often than not, it's going to create unnecessary resistance.
Couple of things came up in my mind as you were speaking there was you mentioned the word, and I think you said the most dangerous or, hot button word is you. So specifically, what do you mean in regards to that? So if I say, hey, I noticed you, does that immediately then cause someone to back up, become defensive and not open or receptive to anything after the word you?
Yeah, it certainly can. So one of the things we like to say is, if you think, here, we're going to do an illustration for people listening, right? But think about an upside down triangle. If I'm going to use the word you in an illustration or in a question, I want that word you to be at the bottom of the triangle, and I want to work my way down to set it up. So if I was going to say to somebody, I noticed that your performance has fallen off. I've noticed that you aren't as supportive of your teammates as you used to be. I noticed that you tend to get a little bit more impatient these days than you used to. All of these could be true. It could be supported by facts, and they're not the world's greatest accusations, but anybody who hears that, I would expect their first reaction to be, what? And now, whether you're right or wrong, my first response is to defend myself against that accusation, not open myself up to what you're going to say next. Whereas if I was to switch that, and this gets back to that illustrate before you investigate, now it's, Jay, oftentimes when we work on these engagements for customers, one of the unstated rules is that we have agreed that they can change the rules in the middle of the game, but we can't change the deadline.
Mm.
And the more they ask to change the rules and the closer we get to the deadline, the more frustrated and impatient we can all get as we're scrambling to meet their changing needs. So I'm curious, as it appears that your patience has waned over the last week or so, which of the customers' demands have had the biggest impact? So I'm still going to illustrate that, dude, it looks like you're a burning fuse, but I'm going to earn the right to do it with that illustration first. So as they're listening to you going, yeah, that's right. They do get to change the rules and we don't get to change the deadline. That's not fair. They're already lining up their self-image with answering my question, and they don't even know what question is coming yet because
Yeah.
I'm getting them in the correct mind space where I'm not showing judgment to get them to open up before I ask the question. And when I do, you're right. That word "you" has to be in that question. It'd be really weird if I was like, Jay, why do you think people in a leadership position might show a lack of patience? Like, that's not going anywhere.
Yeah. That's a skill set, man. And I'm sure that's what you train. I mean, because, most people are conditioned right away is to assign it to, the individual that they're speaking to. And there's only one way to communicate that is by, using the word you. So I'm sure that's something that you train in your courses is how to effectively set that up, set those illustrations up in a manner in which that, effectively gets you to the outcome you're looking for.
It is. You raise a great point there as well. We've, for better or more likely worse, we've all, myself included, been operationally conditioned how to speak by adults when we were kids.
Right.
Your parents or grandparents or guardians, your teachers, your coaches, if you were in church or in the scouts, your church leaders or scout leaders, whatever you did. If you had a lot of fun growing up, maybe it was a police officer or three, but these were the people that essentially taught us how to communicate. And they did it by talking down to us as adults to kids. And because that's how we were taught to communicate, we grow up, we get these leadership roles, we start talking to other adults like they're kids because that's all we've known our whole life. And then we wonder why we end up in these suboptimal outcomes and these arguments we don't understand and people who don't take our message the way we meant it. Where if we take a step back and say, okay, here's the outcome I would like to achieve. Here are the reasons why I feel like the person I need to talk to wouldn't necessarily like to do that. Okay, now how do I talk to them in a way that reduces their resistance and actually leverages these reasons why they shouldn't want to, so they will want to? Now we're helping them save face. Now we're giving them ownership in the conversation, things that you're talking about. And when the outcome or relationship matters enough, then yeah, it pays off to elevate how we speak and to take a few seconds to think that through ahead of time.
So I can imagine too, in these situations, I mean, not every time it's going to turn out to the results that you want. And then you're going to get those where, it seems like you just hit a brick wall. So let's say you're in that initial conversation, you're addressing issues, regardless of whatever the situation might be. You're addressing an issue, and immediately you're hit with a brick wall. And you're like, okay, where do I go from here outside of, you know what, you're out of here.
Good idea. You're fired.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So when you run into that brick wall, a couple of thoughts. One is, how far away can we see the brick wall coming? There are times where it's a complete and utter surprise, but there are times where we had the ability to see it coming prior, either based on previous history, either based on changing in body language, based on somebody trying to interrupt the conversation. One little thing that probably doesn't get talked about a lot is often if I'm talking to somebody and they inhale, the deeper the inhale, the louder they're about to speak. If they exhale, not all the time, but if they exhale, that could be capitulation. Okay, you're right. Okay, you got me. Okay, I'm willing to talk. Okay, I see your point. But that inhale, if I'm having a conversation with somebody and I see or hear a large inhale and they parse their lips, like they press their lips together, they're about to speak. So I've got like that moment to, how do I handle this? Am I going to let them jump in? Do I take the conversation another way? Like there's plenty of decisions that can be made. But once we do hit that brick wall, and again, we can do a couple of examples if you'd like. I'm happy to do whatever you want.
Sure.
But what we want to do is try to work with it, not against it.
Hmm.
Because if somebody throws up a brick wall and the very first thing I do is try to argue it, especially if I try to argue it rationally, I'm helping them reinforce their decisions. One of the things that we run into a lot working with executives, business owners, is that they get really frustrated, and rightfully so, it's understandable, trying to understand why their rational solutions don't solve somebody else's emotional problem.
Well, that was a powerful line you right said. Rational to the emotional, because there's no alignment there.
Yeah. I'm not going to bang in a nail with a wrench. I'm not going
Yeah.
to turn a bolt with a hammer. So my rational solution almost certainly isn't going to solve an emotional problem. So what I want to do is I want to try to work with it instead of immediately confronting it. And again, based on the context of the situation, do I just let them gas themselves out? And once they're done, I have the opportunity to rejoin the conversation. Do I just cut them off and say, nope, that's it? You had your one chance, you're fired? Maybe. Do I pause the conversation to another day when cooler heads can prevail, or later today? Do I bring somebody else into the conversation? Honestly, if we think, and I'll pause after this, if we think that a conversation could be likely to come to a head, think about where we're having it. Are you having it in your office across from your desk where somebody else is more likely to see you as an authority figure that they want to battle with? Or are we having this in a neutral environment? Which could be a conference room? Are we taking them out to lunch? Are we going for a walk or sitting on a bench outside because it's a nice day? Are there lots of people watching? Is there nobody watching? Do we have a well-chosen witness to participate in the conversation who's likely to be a calming figure? Or do we bring somebody in who they really don't like and we just poured fuel on the fire and we didn't even know it? So we can be making all of these decisions ahead of time. If you want to work through some examples of how do you handle it if somebody says X, I'm happy to do a few of those examples too, but schematically or strategically, those are some thoughts.
Yeah, this is really good stuff. Yeah, that'd be fun to do.
Yeah, if you've got a couple, like when you think of brick walls, what do you think about people saying?
Let's say I've got an individual who is tasked with X, and I'm having this conversation with them about the execution of this X process. And immediately they go, well, X, I thought Mary was going to handle X.
Mhm.
We had this conversation. She said she was going to handle it. And we were both trained the same thing. So I thought she had it. So it's really not our responsibility, that kind of thing.
Cool. All right. So they say, we had the conversation before. I'll just make it you and I, so that way it's a little bit easier. You and I have this conversation before. You say you're going to do X. It didn't get done, or it looks like it's not going to get done. I come in and say, hey, where are we on this? How come this isn't getting done? And you come back with, well, Mary and I talked about it. We have the same training. She said she could do it, so it's not my responsibility anymore. I'm going to do this two ways. First, I'm going to do the answer, and then I'm going to come back to how we asked the question to begin with. So, which is a little bit unfair because this is a hypothetical situation, but we'll do it anyway. So the first words I'm going to say, when you essentially tell me, I talked to Mary, she has the same training I do, she said she would do it, it's not my responsibility anymore. The first words out of my mouth are, thank you, Jay. I appreciate you bringing me up to speed.
Mm.
Because
commonality.
they're the last words on the planet you expected to hear.
Right.
You were praying that I would say, oh, okay, I'll go talk to Mary. But you're expecting me to say, Jay, we had this conversation. It's still your responsibility. So when I come in and I say, thank you, Jay, I appreciate you bringing me up to speed, your brain gets put in a pretzel.
Mm.
You don't know what to do. And so now I have this small moment in time as you try to unwrap that pretzel to turn this positive. Thank you, Jay. I appreciate you bringing me up to speed. And a lot of what we do is delegate or bring team members on board, either it's because it's their expertise or we're busy or we're developing skill sets. At the end of the day, this project is all of our responsibilities. It reflects on us as an organization as much as it reflects on us as individuals. So let's put Mary aside for a moment and let me ask you this. Based on your experience and expertise, what do you see as the three largest remaining challenges that need to be overcome to get this process complete? So now I'm not going back to, you need to do this. There's that magical word, you again. I'm going back to, what are the three biggest obstacles left? If I get three, great. If I get one, fine. It doesn't matter. It's all about how the question lands on the brain. So now as he thinks, he comes up with things, he knows there's reasons why this isn't working, and who cares if he wants to blame it on Mary or not? Now, as he continues to say, these are the problems and these are the challenges I have left, we can talk through that. We can validate them, ask the follow-up questions, make sure that they're all accurate. And then when we're done, now I can say, thank you, Jay. So considering you and I are having the conversation about getting this process back on track right now, what are the next 3 steps we need to take to make sure this is back on track by the end of the week?
Sure.
Which
Can they
gets back
take
to your comment earlier about giving them input. And then
Sure.
at the end of the conversation, it's thank you, Jay. I appreciate you bringing Mary in. From here on out, you're my point man in order to make sure this gets done.
Then how quickly is the follow-up? In other words, at the end of that process, there's got to be a follow-up to check to ensure that whatever was tasked was completed. Does it just depend on the length of the project at hand?
Yeah, that's going to be dependent on a lot of things. How much time is left on the clock? How much time does it take to get the next 2 or 3 steps rolling? How much visibility do you have on it? Maybe based on your role in the organization, you're going to see this unfolding in front of you in real time anyway, or maybe you have no visibility and you need to go back and check faster. So is it the next day? Is it in 2 days? Is it the next week? I think there's a open conversation there, depending on the context of the situation. But the follow-up should not be, in my opinion, the follow-up should not be based on how quickly are you doing what you said you would do. The follow-up should be based on when do I need to be up to speed to make sure we don't miss the deadline? Like it
Yeah.
should be an outcome-based follow-up, not an input-based follow-up schedule.
And what's fascinating for me is, the entrepreneurs that I coach and I work with, oftentimes, maybe not to the level extent in which you're breaking this down, but to some degree, we're having this conversation. And what I find is the leader drops the ball. They don't do the follow up. And then to the individuals, like, well, this guy really isn't very serious about it anyway. So why should I take it serious? So the question I have is, in this framework, I already know the answer, but how critical is the leadership aspect, as it relates to in any organization, if the leadership doesn't have the skill sets necessary to lead and develop a team, and number one is to hold accountable and follow through, because I know there are business owners listening right now, but they're going, shit, that might be me. Talk about that, man.
I mean, you know the answer. It is critical, but let's also give a little bit of credit where credit's due. Sometimes we don't follow up because we're lazy. We don't want to. It's conflict. We're conflict averse. We just want to trust somebody. That's why we hire them, which could be a rationalization for being lazy and conflict averse, but that's a conversation for another day. But to give credit where credit's due, most of the time, I would believe that they don't follow up because they're busy and because there's so many other things they're doing and so many other things that they're thinking about that new crises, new fires, new priorities emerge, and it just falls off of their radar. That's why they don't follow up. But to your point, it is critical. A lot of times, leaders, CEOs, founders, business owners don't necessarily stop to think that, as unfair as this may be, they are always on stage. Always.
Right.
They're always being watched. And when they are behaving their best, they're working to set the example for how we want everybody else to operate and behave. Most of the time, most of their team won't match that level. We're just hoping that they get reasonably close, right? You get into that top tier, that's good enough. Okay, cool. But then what happens is when their behavior starts to fall off, and we could use not following up as an example, now it actually works the other way. So to your point, well, if this isn't important to you, it's even less important to me. So just random general examples. If you don't listen, I'll listen less. If you don't come to work on time, I'll come into work late. If you take Fridays off, I might start taking Thursdays off. Like if this is how low you're willing to set the bar at the top, seeing I'm not at the top, I can set my bar even lower. So it's critical from that standpoint. But from another one as well, all religious references aside, there's a big difference between trust and faith. Faith is often based on hope. Trust is based on evidence. So if we want somebody to trust us, we have to consistently give them evidence that we're trustworthy. If we want someone to believe that we listen to them, we have to give them evidence that we listen to them, which can't be done during the conversation. It has to be done after the conversation. So if we don't follow up, if we aren't consistent, not only are we giving people the excuse to rationalize lowering their behavioral standards, we're also making it harder for people to trust us and believe in us and what's important to us and how we execute the values of our own organization.
Yeah. So a last question I want to ask in regards to the business setting, and I just want to touch briefly in the personal setting. So you had mentioned earlier, right? There's a certain amount of times in which you're going to confront an issue, address it before ultimately you got to have that no BS conversation, right? It's either shit or get off the pot. Is that different for everyone, or is there a typical rule of thumb? I'm going to address a problem twice. If there's no results the next time, if this is not completed, if the changes are not, realized, then, obviously you're deciding to move on. Because I've always said in all my business, I said, I will never fire you. And the reason I will never fire you is because you'll always know what the expectations and the standards are and will follow through with that. If you choose not to follow that, you will fire yourself.
I definitely like that. You'll fire yourself. And I do think it would be really easy if we could all just do the 3 strikes and you're out rule.
Yeah.
But it's rarely that simple. So for me, context is king, and it's important to consider the totality of circumstances. So do I have somebody new? Were the expectations clear? How many times have they been in this scenario? Honestly, I need to be reflective. When we've had the conversations before, was I clear enough? Like, was I really clear enough? I thought I was, but was I? The best person in the world for telling me that I wasn't clear enough is my young son. Because I'll ask him to do something, he'll do something different, and I'll say, Gabe, and he'll turn around and explain to me how in his mind he's doing exactly what I just told him to do. And I'm going, son of a he's right. Like, I wasn't clear enough. So yeah, I mean, are the expectations clear? Do they have the resources necessary? Was I clear enough? How big is the issue? How much support did they have? So I'm a huge believer in accountability. So for people who are listening to this, please don't think that you're listening to somebody try to explain away why someone should have their job forever. No, I'm the opposite. When it becomes clear that somebody is no longer a positive, productive, contributing member to the team, we'll find somebody else. But how we get there, again, I'll go back to that phrase, coach up or coach out. How much lead time did they have? What was the quality of our conversations? Okay, I told them that they needed to improve in these 3 areas and they had a month to do it. Have I talked to them in the last month? Or did I just show up a month later and say, oh, you haven't improved? Oh, great. So I expected them to do a magic trick and I didn't give them any of the support they needed over the last month or so to do it. I could probably go on and on about the gray areas. For me, it should be an outcome-focused decision. For somebody to be successful in this role, what are the outcomes they need to be achieving? What's the cultural impact they need to be having? What are the skills and attributes they need to be demonstrating? Okay, do I have a reasonable opportunity to help support that growth and development and get them there? Let me do that. Along that line, do they at some point make it unequivocal that they're not going to be where I need them to be? Well, then thank you very much for all your time. We appreciate it. You can go somewhere else. We'll find someone else to do the job.
Yeah, that last point was just absolutely crushed. The whole interview, you absolutely crushed. This has been a lot of fun. I've always said communication is a skill set. It's just a want to learn how to become a better communicator, right? Whether you're on the front side or on the back side, it really doesn't matter. So tell us about some of the work that you do, how you train people and through your courses.
I appreciate you asking. Thank you. With Inquasive and with the discipline listening method, more often than not, we work with senior executives, CEOs, business owners, senior leaders, sales teams, negotiation teams, and HR teams to help them apply the strategic observation and persuasive communication skills necessary to uncover the hidden everyday confessions that are lying in all of our conversations. And we do that through virtual conversations like these. We do that through keynote sessions, customized workshops. It's the whole parameter. I think people are familiar with most of the delivery models. We do have the book, The Discipline Listening Method, available on Barnes & Noble and Amazon. But really, our goal, like the conversation we've had today, is provide people with the skills, perspectives, and techniques to get the most out of the relationships they already have in place. because when we can focus on the outcomes that we can achieve with people, now we can put our emotions in our back pocket. We can realign our expectations. We can give people the communication experiences they need in order to generate the results that we desire, often by getting the information we need when we need it, as opposed to communicating ineffectively and then getting mad at somebody else for not giving us what we asked for incorrectly.
Yeah. I'd imagine that's absolutely golden in the most important relationship, which is your spouse and your kids. So I imagine you have an absolute perfect marriage because you're because your
When my wife
communication
hears that, she
skills.
might crash her car. I will say this, my wife and son are the two things that make me the luckiest man in the world. But in all honesty, the relationships where even I find this the hardest is my personal relationships
Sure.
because of how much I love them and because of the risk level and how much I have to lose. So
Sure.
if it's an investigative conversation, and I don't really do that too much anymore, but if it's a negotiation, if it's a leadership conversation, if it's business development, that's business, right? So it's a little bit easier to separate emotions from the strategy and execute and follow the plan and use the techniques. But now when I'm home and it's my wife, it's my son, it's a different conversation. The emotion levels are different. The connection level is different. It's in fairness, those conversations can be the hardest.
Yeah, no question. I mean,
There's my
as you-
excuse. Sorry.
Well, no, well, as you said, man, in the closest relationships, the ones that have the greatest meaning, it's really hard to separate, put those emotions, as you mentioned, in your back pocket. But that's the key. I mean, really, to step back and sift through the emotions to get at the core issue, so you can find commonality and at some point figure out a solution that's workable for both parties. So, man, this has been a lot of fun. I learned an awful lot. I appreciate you coming on today.
I appreciate you having me, Jay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have any, when you got new stuff coming up, let us know. We'd love to have you back on.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, Triple P Nation, as I always say, you be you, just be the best you. And I promise you will always empower your dreams, ignite your passion, and accelerate your prosperity. Until next week, be well.